of Darkness is a brand new horror movie to hit theaters. It's directed by Andrew Cumming, and it's a movie about a group of cave people looking for a better cave. Now, that's the very simplified version. I'm going to give you a better synopsis right now. Essentially, you have a group of people living 45,000 years ago here on Earth, and they are looking for a new place to live because the land that they originally settled on is not growing anything. It's rotten land. It won't grow any crops for them. They need to find somewhere new to live. They look off in the distance, they see some caves, and they're like, those caves. Those caves are going to be the best caves for this family. We need to get there. And so this movie is about their journey to those caves, and they have to go through a ton of forest to get there. And while they're going through the forest at night, something is stalking them. Something is hunting them. And if that's an interesting concept to you, you can go check this movie out in theaters. It is playing right now. With that said, let me get into my positives and some of my negatives. First positive I have for this movie is going to be the cinematography. A lot of this movie was filmed in Scotland, and it is beautiful when they're showing you those hills. It looks really clean. It looks really good. Now, I've seen some people complain because a lot of the shots of this movie are at night, in the dark, in the forest, and so they're able to hide things. That's not what I'm talking about. There's just certain moments of this movie where I think the cinematography really shines, and I wanted to point that out. I wanted to put that in my positives. The other positive I have for this movie is just the concept in general, the idea of having to protect yourself from something that's coming out at night, trying to stalk you and the people that you love. Like, whenever I think of that, the instant I heard of the premise of this movie, I thought about the movie Predator, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, and that's a movie about a bunch of badass commandos that go into a jungle and, of course, are hunted by the Predator. So when I got the setup for this movie, I was like, that sounds like Predator, and that automatically gets me excited because I like the idea of people being hunted. There's also another thing that I liked about this movie, sort of in the same vein, so that's why I'm making them just one positive together, and that would be the sound design for the thing that is stalking them. Again, it had Predator vibes to it, and I liked that. The sounds it would make, the things that it would do, the cracking of branches, because once it got dark, it was pitch black in that forest, and they'd have to light a fire. And there's one scene in particular where they're trying to light a fire, and just it won't light, and you can just feel it getting darker, and whatever it is that's stalking them is getting closer and closer. So yeah, cinematography, sound design, the overall concept, all of that worked for me. All of that was really fun during this movie. But of course, my positives have to end somewhere, and that is where they will end for this movie. We have to get into my negatives. The movie acts as a slow burn throughout the majority of this movie, and while slow burns can be good, especially in the horror genre, they need to build to something incredible for me to walk away being like, man, that was great. I gotta recommend it to people. Unfortunately, the first two acts of this movie are so slow going. They are essentially these people walking, making their journey to what they think is going to be better land, having conversations with each other. And that could be interesting if the dialogue was better, but because the dialogue, the conversations between the characters just wasn't that exciting, at least for me, then it just didn't work for me. So I'm sitting there going along this journey with these people, and they're talking to each other, and I'm like, it's boring. Like, it's not exciting. Nothing they're saying is keeping me hooked to the story itself. And so while I did like the cinematography, while I did enjoy the creepy sounds at night, I didn't have any reason to stay invested in this story with these people for the majority of the first two acts of this movie. That leads me to the third act, which is another issue I have, the plot twist reveal. And it really shouldn't be a plot twist. It should have been some sort of monster out there. But what it turns out to be is not something that I particularly connected with. So much like my Lisa Frankenstein review, I have to say here in this review for Out of Darkness that it didn't connect with me in any way, but it might connect with other people. I had someone go into my comment section on my YouTube short, and they were like, hey, this movie really worked for me. All those things that you didn't like, I liked. So people are going to like different things. That's the great thing about movies. I can like something you don't like, and you can love something that I'm not a big fan of. It's just how it works. And so yeah, for me, for all that setup that they did, the slow burn all the way through those first two acts, when you get to the third act and you're like, okay, what is this thing? There was a cool direction I feel like they could have gone in that would have just blown my mind, and I would have been invested till the very end, and I would have told people, hey, you gotta check this movie out. I won't spoil it here, what I wanted it to be versus what it actually was, but what it turned out to be for me just wasn't enough. There wasn't enough to that thing that it was for me to want to go back and watch more. Now, to each their own. It might have worked for you. That's how movie reviews work. I'll move on to my final negative. And so my final negative for this movie is going to be the artificial language. Now, if you don't know, this movie is completely in an artificial language, and the language is supposed to be sort of, oh, look at these primitive people, how they talk to each other. They don't talk in English, so we'll put English subtitles at the bottom of the screen. And while I'm not personally the biggest fan of having to read subtitles, I watched a movie like Godzilla Minus One, and it didn't bother me at all. I loved it. I had no problem with that movie at all. One of the best movies I saw last year, and the subtitles didn't even cross my mind 10 minutes into the movie. But again, because the movie was sort of boring as they were going, because the dialogue between the characters wasn't interesting, having to read all of the dialogue as well as go on this journey with them that was pretty slow going didn't work for me. On top of that, the artificial language is just not necessary in my opinion, because if these people had spoken English, I'd have been like, all right, yeah, I needed to understand the movie. I get it personally. It's not like, oh, well, this is a story about Japanese people fighting Godzilla, so we want to show it in their language. And oh, by the way, the movie was also made in another country. So I'm not trying to compare it to Godzilla. I'm just saying that like why I was okay with one thing and I'm just not okay with the other. That's kind of my reasoning. Like if you're just going to use an artificial language, go with English. I could at least understand the characters and get to view the jungle around them, which was my biggest issue with having to read those words, is the characters would be talking to each other in these tense scenes, and I want to look through the scene and kind of see what's going on in the background. Like, can I see something going on? Is somebody jumping back there? Like, what's going on? But instead, I have to read the words at the bottom of the screen, so I'm focused at the bottom of the screen, reading the words so I can understand what the characters are going through, not able to enjoy the rest of the screen, and that bothered me. So that's my biggest negative, I think, for this movie, is just the artificial language was completely unnecessary. Overall, I'll say this is another early horror movie that we're getting, and so it's not a movie I would necessarily recommend to anybody. It's definitely a movie I wouldn't recommend you sit in a theater through, but maybe it's a movie that I would watch at home, or I would recommend to someone watches at home, because I feel like you control the pace of the movie a little better that way. You could decide, hey, I'm going to take a break from this for a second, but I feel like when you're in the theater, you're locked into that movie, which is usually something that I appreciate about the theater, but for a movie like this, not being able to control that pace, not being able to just pause it, come back to it a little bit later. Maybe it's a movie that would work a little better on home video. It's a movie that would work better on streaming. But with that said, those are just my opinions, because that's my review for Out of Darkness. Guys, have you had a chance to see Out of Darkness yet? If you have, let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know what you liked, didn't like, if we agreed or disagreed. All of that matters to me, and I appreciate you telling me in the comment section. And finally, guys, if you like this video and you want to watch more, don't forget to hit the like button, because it helps the video, it helps the channel, and it helps me right here. Thanks for watching, and feed me a stray cat. All right, guys, we're at the end of the Out of Darkness review, and I had a good time making this review. Did not have a great time watching this movie, but it's the sacrifice I'm willing to make. No, really, I love going to the theater, knowing that I'll get to talk about this movie no matter what later. It's just something I love to do. This is my favorite hobby in the world, and anytime you guys watch these videos and you talk to me, you go back and forth with me in the comment section, it just means a lot to me, so thank you. With that said, if you want to watch more of my videos, maybe you're a big movie collector, well, I've got all of my Blu-ray collection back there, update videos right there, and I've got all of my 2024 movie reviews right there.